Let's hope so.
There we
Thanks
are.
thanks for joining us, everyone. And can I just introduce, obviously, the star of the affair, Dr. Matthew Tart, who preeminent in the field, and I've crossed swords with him one or two times up north. So this does promise to be an enlightening experience. And I'll leave it to you, Matthew. Off you go.
Thank you, Tim. Well, first of all, thank you very much for the invitation. I've been looking forward to this. There's nothing I like more than giving a 4-hour presentation on the details of telecommunications. I assume everybody's up for it. I'm anticipating actually 45 minutes, 55 minutes of me talking. There won't be too much technical in it. It's really talking about cell site analysis as a forensic science activity to do with the codes. If there's any questions, just shout up at any point. If it gets overwhelming, we might change that policy, but from the beginning, just shout out. Don't bother putting your hands up or anything, just shout out. Okay, so I'm going to share my screen with you. If I could just have Tim tell me if you can see that, please.
Yep, all good.
Brilliant. All right. So the title of the talk is Cell Site Analysis as a Forensic Science Activity within the Forensic Science Regulator codes that were implemented last year, 2023, I think it was April. It defines all sorts of things that the Forensic Science Regulator wishes to control to make sure that it can mitigate risk to the criminal justice system. Cell site analysis is DIG 200, so it's defined as forensic science. Whereas the codes were actually implemented in April last year, he's indicated that they're not going to be enforced until for cell site analysis. For everything else, it's already enforced. Cell site analysis, it's going to be enforced in October 2025. What that means by enforced is that he has statutory powers to be able to prevent individuals from practicing or organisations for practicing. That means he's not going to do that. So the quality control will be at a court-by-court basis, and that will be via criminal procedure rules, which Part 19 details expert evidence, and that's supported by criminal practice directions, which I'll go into in a minute anyway, just to make sure that everybody's au fait on it. The code, DIG 200, is the de facto standard for cell site analysis. So again, the purpose of it is to mitigate risk, and I would suggest that anybody not following it, therefore potentially poses a risk to the criminal justice system. I'll show you some slides now rather than just telling you what I'm going to tell you. So first of all, the code was reviewed by the House of Lords before it was given royal assent. There were only 3 pages of comments. There were 3 Lords made comment, page each-ish. And one of the comments was this: there's also been a worry about the way evaluative opinions have been formed. I'm very glad, therefore, that there is a firm steer for evaluative opinions. Now, I won't ask for a show of hands or anything, but not many people that I've experienced within cell site analysis, or indeed within the legal community, know what an evaluative opinion is. And it's really important. So in the 1970s and 1980s, there were a bunch of miscarriages of justice at which forensic science was deemed to have played a major cause. And evaluative opinions was the problem, that they were being done inappropriately. And there was a model, the case assessment interpretation model, developed by the Home Office Forensic Science Service, which at the time did pretty much all of forensic science in the 80s and 90s to respond to that. It's the de facto standard throughout traditional forensics. It's endorsed by the European Network of Forensic Science Institutes, the Chartered Society of Forensic Sciences, the Royal Statistical Society. And so it's just the model that is used for giving evaluative opinion within DNA and fibers and glass and a whole range of all the wet forensics. It's almost unheard of within digital forensics, and there's a good reason for that. Digital forensics has grown up in isolation largely. And also a lot of digital forensics is to do with recovery of information rather than interpreting what that information means in the context of questions at court. Now, the thing with cell site analysis is that it's all inference, right? We're interested in where a phone was. We don't know where it was. It's not in the records. But there's information there from which we can form an opinion as to the sort of area it might have been in, and whether that area includes positions that are of probative value to either prosecution or defence. So not many people in the industry understand what an evaluative opinion is, and that means that they are repeating the mistakes that scientists who are quite knowledgeable in their fields in the 1970s and 1980s, the issues were to do with the questions they were addressing and the manner in which they were answering them. And we're repeating those questions, I think, in many areas. And I'm going to in the next 40 minutes or so go through what that really means. So there's loads of places we could go with this. I'm just going to do the first two boxes, as it were. I'm going to introduce us just for a couple of minutes, just so you know who we are. And then I'm really going to talk about facts, opinions, and the truth, because I think while there are many issues to do with the way that cell site analysis is presented at court, the biggest issue for me, the thing that's at scale, is that no overt opinion is given. And it's just thrown over the fence to the jury. I'm not sure if anyone's aware of RV Calland. It was a ruling in 2018 concerning cell site analysis. I think it's highly relevant. I'm going to be going through that as well. I think it really does apply automatically in those circumstances. It's worth mentioning at this point, I've sent Tim a document. We call it our white paper. And it's basically, it's a 12-page Word document, or it's a PDF, that really describes concerns, the legal really and the regulatory context of cell site analysis, and provides, I would suggest, some arguments for potentially excluding it if it's analyst product from court, because of the issues that I'm going to raise in the next 40 minutes. So by way of hello, here's a very large wordy slide. The purpose of this slide, really, because I'll send you a printout as well. You don't need to take notes for any of this. There's 10 of us within the cell site team at CCL. CCL is much bigger than that. It's 180, I think it is now. It could be larger now. I'm number 9 there on that list. It's obviously in order of quality of appearance, although I'm insulting Kevin there. The point of this is that we are treating this, and have always treated this, as a forensic science activity, i.e. detailed technical knowledge of the artifacts that we're considering is separate to the skills that are necessary to generate observations, to generate maps and tables. And we are very concerned that having the knowledge of the artifacts, we also need to be able to transfer that into the expert space, which means understanding the case assessment interpretation model and the duties of an expert. I would suggest that within the industry, those 3 points, the usage of the skills is everywhere. The knowledge of telecommunications is largely absent, but not entirely absent. The duties of the expert witness is almost entirely absent. And I'm going to be phrasing my talk in those terms. So between the 10 of us, a lot of us are old. I'm not the only one with white in my beard. We follow the code, and we have followed the code since before it was the code, because the code really reflects forensic science thinking that has been embedded for the last 15 to 20 years. Between us, we've got over 250 years of knowledge, and some of the people are military, so they've got deep technically in certain areas. Some are on the handset end, and I came through the forensic science route, but we've got ex-network engineers, the whole lot. We've even got a PhD in astrophysics in there. So, really, the main talk. We're 10 minutes in, although we started a little late. I want to talk about artifacts, observations, and conclusions. Don't worry about those titles. I'm using them really to highlight what a fact is. In terms of cell site analysis, because I learned last year that, in fact, I think it was earlier this year, that some barristers believe that inference is facts and common sense. And that's a different way of defining the word inference to me, and indeed any other forensic scientist I know of. I think of inference as synonymous with opinion, i.e. it's not a fact, right? So if we are going to call it facts and common sense, it's probably a good idea to define what we mean by a fact and what we mean by common sense. I don't think that they apply to cell site analysis. So when I use the word inference, what I mean is opinion, okay? And just to be clear, all opinion evidence is expert evidence. That's quite clear in CRIM-PR. So you have ordinary witnesses and you have expert witnesses. There's nothing in between. If you're giving an opinion, expert witness, if we're trying to figure out where a phone was, it doesn't tell us where it was. There's an opinion involved, therefore it's been expert witness. That's the overriding message. So first of all, what are we looking at? I know that you've all seen call data records before. I'm not going to talk about how networks operate or show you shiny new machines that go ping. I'm not trying to sell that service. What I'm trying to do is discuss how we apply them to a forensic science regime. So, we have a call data record. It could have mobile phone calls, text messages, incoming, outgoing, GPRS. This is an example of a normalized table of GPRS on the 3 network. It's relevant to the specific thing that I'm showing you, but the point of this slide is that just because it's in a CDR doesn't mean it happened. Okay, and there are all sorts of problems to do with data transactions, and I'll talk about that a little bit, but my objective is not to make you experts in the technical aspects of cell site analysis. It's to be able to spot when somebody isn't an expert in the technical aspects of cell site analysis or are giving inappropriate opinion. So here we have a phone number, a date of a call event, a time. You'll see that they're 15 minutes iterations, as it were. The durations are all 0 because that's how it's often done. It's from Hutch, as I say, and we've got postcode locations here. Within the call data records, we've also got more precise estimates. We'll have cell IDs as well, and azimuths. It's not pertinent to the point that I'm making here. So what I've done is I've made some calculations about the distances between sequential postcodes. So the distance between EN28AA and 3QA and 93QN, etc. And so what we find if we look at this is that we have 10 kilometers between the first and second records that have got listed times of 10 and 10:15, 18 kilometers between the records at 10:15 and 10:30, 10:30 and 10:45 are the same location and they've got naught, and then it's apparently 305 kilometers away where the mast is between the call event with a listed time at 10:45 and 11 o'clock. Okay, and between 11 o'clock and 11:15. 326 kilometers. What does that look like on a map? Looks like this. We've got a bunch of stuff down there in the southeast of England and something up there just north of Liverpool. And so the cell sites that we were talking about, listed time of 10:45, listed time of 11 o'clock, listed time of 11:15. This is factually accurate, i.e. this is what was in the call data record. It is not necessarily a factual representation of where the device was at those times, or indeed where the device was at all. And the reason I say that is because on the 3 network, on this form of call data, you can end up with, under certain circumstances, other party call data creeping into it without you necessarily spotting it and knowing it. And that's happened here. Now, that is a very specific issue to do with a specific type of call record that is no longer commonly encountered, although I have it in a case that I'm dealing with right now, except that it's a legacy case. My point here, though, is that within GPRS in particular, there's all sorts of uncertainties that can creep in there. So just because it's in the CDR doesn't mean it's true. So we need to start off right at the beginning, because the artifact that we're considering is the CDR, the call data record. That is the equivalent of the fingerprint that was recovered from the scene, or the bullet, or the gunshot residue, etc. The artifact that we're looking at is the call data record, and then we are going to do things like surveys and the like that may generate further evidence, but they're all for the analysis of that original artifact, and there are uncertainties in the original artifact. Okay, so once we start talking about facts, there's a problem here, because it's very easy to generate a map like this. There's products on the market, CSS and Chorus being the 2 big ones, and you can with minimal training, and I mean minimal. I mean you can do it within an hour, and you can probably know how most of it works within a couple of hours. You can take some call data records in, get call sequence tables and generate tables, and you can generate maps. And it doesn't matter if you do that a million times or one time, it will take you no closer to understanding how those artifacts were generated. So we don't really get experience of what's going on by generating the tables. Now, a lot of analyst product is literally that. There's no necessity for deeper knowledge. Some analysts, by the way, have got great knowledge. So I'm not saying that all analysts don't have this, but a lot don't, and you don't need it. And so the concern is that analysts are generating call sequence tables and maps, presenting it to the jury for the jury to sort it out. And they will accurately portray what was in the call data record. But that is misleading. The call data record itself may be misleading. And you need deeper knowledge to be able to understand or detect and be able to accommodate that. So the first bit is, well, the call data record may not be factual. It's a fact it exists. The information within it may not be a factual representation of the actual true activity of the device. Second bit, we see this all the time. There's an offence, somebody's alleged to be somewhere. Here's where the mast is. You can do this, as I say, within a few hours of training, and you can do it within minutes. Actually in the analysis phase, it's very easy to do. Okay, and so this is then presented as if it's meaningful. This cell site is within a kilometre, and we're alleging he was at the scene at the time. Look, it must be relevant. Well, it depends. There's other information than where the cell site is. I mean, even within the call data record, we've almost always got an azimuth, an antenna point direction. Is it pointed towards it? So the point is here that the mast location is the beginning point of trying to assess the area, and it's always an area, over which a given cell might have provided service. And we don't know what that area is either, by the way. We don't know where the phone is. We don't know the area in which that phone was, but we can estimate it by a range of activities. Very beginning is where's the mast. Next one is which direction is it pointed in. Then we might look at terrain, the sort of environment where there's clutter there. Then we might do surveys. There's all sorts of things we can do to refine our estimate. But it's always an estimate. And what's an estimate? It's an opinion. What's an opinion? Well, it's not a fact, right? If it were, it's got uncertainty in it. And if it had no uncertainty, it would be a fact. Well, it isn't, right? So can we use these observations, just happily throw them at a jury? Well, if all you're trying to allege is they might have been a bit close and it's not critical about the time of the event, well, it's low risk. If we're actually talking about this is during the commission of the offence, you need to look at that in more detail. And the mass location, that's a superficial way of looking at it. So here we've got, this is what cell site analysis is in a nutshell, actually. I mean, cell serve areas, we've gone out and tried to figure what that is. These are just measurements. So grey dots, they look like lines because there's so many of them. Those are where we've been, and we've taken measurements. And the light blue is where we detected the specific cell that we were interested in that might be in the call data record. So these cells will point in different directions. They'll always serve an area, and they might not serve the scene even if the mass is right on top of it. Well, they usually do if it's right on top. But, when you're a kilometre away, hey, it's all bets are off, okay? It's worth doing actually a bit of a plug here. We've got a proper survey. We've got a proper setup in survey. I think it's second to none and better than anybody else's I know. We've got close on, I think, 800 million measurements in it now that last over 6 years, which enables us to be able to quickly do these sort of maps. It makes it really easy, really quick. It also enables us to potentially have an insight as to whether there have been network changes in the area. So again, there are different ways of approaching this, and our approach is to just get as much data as we can get and see if it all points in the same direction. So again, it's a fact that the mast is close to the location of interest. It's not necessarily true that the cell that was used serves there. And you need to do more activity. And remember that if we're trying to assess where a service area, a survey is something we can do, but it's going to inform an opinion. It doesn't really replace the opinion itself because, well, for a start, it's not going to be at the time of the offence, right? And networks can change with time. And also, and another thing, sound like my wife in an argument, there's cell site surveys. They're a sampling method, I think, in my view. Other views may be available, but essentially they enable us to have an insight into what's going on, but they're not perfect. They're in a vehicle. Usually we can do walk surveys, but usually it's in a vehicle at a certain height and we're driving up and down roads. We're not going in and out of houses. People object to that. And it would take, we don't take an infinite number of measurements at different heights. It would be impossible to do that. So we're going to take these measurements and we're then going to see whether we've seen them. Now, the thing is that as far as I know, we've got the most comprehensive survey equipment of anybody in the certainly within the criminal justice system of England and Wales. And we know that we've got a false negative rate. So, for example, in a SIM-based system, your handset can only select one cell at a given time, or there'll be only one in the call data record, certainly on 2G and 4G and 5G. And so if there are a lot of cells that can provide service, it'll pick one out of those, which means it won't be picking up the other ones, which means you end up with something called a false negative, i.e. there's a cell that legitimately serves there, but you didn't pick it up, which means if you didn't see a cell serving at a location, is that an indication it didn't serve there? Well, no, not without additional effort. And the reason I've shown you this complicated table is this is the old Forensic Science Service. So I was in the Home Office Forensic Science Service from 93 till I was made redundant at the end of 2010. Since then, I've been at CCL. This was the Birmingham lab where I was based for a few years, and this is where it is on a map. And we set up a validation system. Well, we did it originally in about 2003 when we were working out how we were going to do cell site analysis. And at that time, everybody was doing spout samples, literally the entire industry. And that means that they were sitting there with a single device and taking measurements for 5 minutes and then talking about how strong the signals were. And we wanted to see what our false negative rates were. So we had 4 identical pieces of equipment labeled at the top here, B1, B2, B3, B4. We stuck them in 2 positions and we said, what cells did we see? Did we connect to? And we detected these as cell IDs. It's an old T-Mobile thing. They did it in hex. Don't worry. They're all unique identifiers. And then we had to look to see if they agreed with each other, and they didn't. So what we have is, for example, box 2, cross means it's not monitoring a cell in any way. N means it's monitoring it, but it's not selected. And tick means I can make calls on this. In 5 minutes, box 3 was happily chatting to 8BE1. Box 2 wasn't even aware of its existence. And that didn't matter if we were there for an hour. Now, bear in mind, this had been a widespread method and this was in place, that method was in place for over a decade. Okay, it's largely gone now, but just because people have done it a certain way for a long period of time doesn't mean it's safe, right? And I think we've got that problem within cell site analysis. But it also means your survey. Well, what do we mean factual here? It's a fact we went out and did a survey. It's a fact we got these results. What do the results mean? Well, you're going to have to interpret them. What does interpret mean? Well, we don't know for sure. So we're going to use judgment. What's another word for judgment? Opinion. So again, we're in the expert space here. And so there's been a steady attempt, a drip, drip, drip until it's established practice almost, even though it's unsound in my view, of, in particular within policing, trying to present a bunch of factual information for the jury to sort out. And it's anything but factual. And the jury aren't equipped to make these views. They're not going to understand what false negatives are, class 1 and class 2 errors. It's not a reasonable expectation. So again, it's a fact that box 2 didn't select 8BE1. It's not true that he didn't serve, right? That's as we call it, a false negative. And by the way, the device was operating exactly as it should. It was a handset. It was a phone. You could make calls and everything. It just didn't select that cell. It selected a different one. Okay. So how is CDRs generated? Well, they're for billing purposes for a start. So they're not designed for us. They're designed so that the networks can charge. And so in the olden days, like 20 years ago, there wasn't much GPRS, if any, and everything was voice calls and text messages. Well, the voice calls, they're billed on how long you're talking. So they had to be tight on the start time and the end time. There were also sometimes differential charges according to where you were in the country. So they had to be tight on the cell IDs. And so one of my colleagues actually used devices for monitoring this. And so he would work for Ofcom and he would throw that data there so they could audit the billing was accurate. And so we have great faith in the start time and the end time of voice calls and the cells that they were using. We also have faith in the text messages for a similar reason. The data, well, it's not billed on time. The network doesn't care how long you're connected. If you've got a really good connection, you download all of Game of Thrones in 7 seconds. It makes no difference to them. If you had a poor connection, it took them 7 hours. What they're going to charge you for is the amount of data. And that means that the call events are recorded in a different way. And that means that the time associated with the use of a given cell ID might be wrong, and often is, and on some networks, pretty much always is, right? Well, there's a problem, right? Unless you understand what that means, what are you going to do about that? How are you going to interpret that? And you can't expect the jury to know it either. So again, that leaves us with a problem that the original artifacts that we're considering have got some uncertainties within them. Now, we understand how many of those uncertainties work. I explained the previous teleporting across the country to Liverpool. We understand why. It's called Timsy sharing. I can tell you what Timsy means, but the purpose here isn't the technical. The point is that if the person presenting the information can't detect that, then explain that, then how the hell can a jury properly accommodate it? And should they? I mean, shouldn't you go through the filter of an opinion first? And there's all sorts of work on there. Some of it not by us, some of it by us, right? I might add the academically published, peer-reviewed work on cell site analysis in the world. The seminal paper was us at CCL, and probably 80% of the follow-up work is all us as well. We're leading it on that. And the reason we're doing that is because we were having the same arguments at court all the time with people doing unsafe practice that we could demonstrate was unsound. And we were fed up with having the same arguments. So we published it, we put it into peer review, we demonstrate our data, and then we put it to the other side then to demonstrate how we were wrong, and they've not been able to do that. And it should concern you that had to happen, because it concerns me. Because in places like DNA, there's libraries of peer-reviewed material. which establishes it. Okay, but there's loads of papers, some of which I might add are commendations from the Chartered Society of Forensic Science, so they're real. Okay, so the stuff that I'm presenting today, there's a level of authenticity in it because it has been peer reviewed by people outside of myself or even the company for which I work, by the wider field of forensic science. So again, just to reiterate, hammer this home, a fact is a thing that is known to or proved to be true. Well, we know a bunch of this stuff isn't, right? So we can't call it a fact, right? Law, the truth about events as opposed to interpretation. Interpretation is a tricksy word. All right. At one end, it's MOC stands for mobile originated call. That's just a lookup, it's a synonym. I don't care about that. What we mean really here is about opinion. Okay, and opinion is everywhere because it has to be, because we're talking about where a phone is and that's not in the record. Again, hammering that home. I'm going to talk about observations throughout this talk because I need to. But before I do that, I want to talk about how cell site is used. So cell site is fantastic. So I am slagging it off. I have been slagging it off for the last 20 minutes, 25 minutes, and I'm going to be slagging off for the next 25. It's still awesome. I love it. I think it's really powerful. But it's like having a really powerful car with really bad tires on ice, right? It can lead you into bad places very easily. It needs to be used appropriately. So cell site is one of the few evidence types that I've seen which can be really critical investigative in proposing scenarios, and it can also be really effective at testing scenarios. Not many areas of forensic science do that. They're usually good at one thing or the other. Okay. Gunshot residue, for example, you use that to test whether somebody had fired the gun. You can't use it to detect the person that had fired the gun. So here, this is a standard thing that we do, and I'm going to lead you down a blind alley and then mug you at the end of it. Let's assume that we've got a call data record, and it's got a load of call events that we trust the time of, the voice calls, we trust it, we trust the cell IDs. There's none of the weirdness I've just shown here. And it's vacillating. It's going from one cell to another in short periods of time. So it's deductive inference, i.e. we were sure that it's in an area of overlap. And it's going between the brown cell, which is 21029, not that that matters, and the purple cell 16837. So brown and purple are being used all the time. Now we're trying to figure out where's the phone. So we might look at that and go, oh, they're up here. So it's reasonable to suggest Hammerwich or Shire Oak. That's an obvious inference, and I think it's legitimate. Okay, and so you go, I think it's Hammerwich, Brown Hills, that sort of area. We then have a look in a little bit more detail, because in the call data records, we've got azimuths. Then we know, the cells are pointed sort of eastish. Well, in that case, we don't think it's to the west of this cell because it's in an area of overlap. So we can exclude to the west of the purple cell. So we're thinking to the west, right? So now we might be thinking Shenstone or the like. We then get a location in because it's coming in from some other information. We go, here's a location of interest at the scene. So we go there and we take some measurements. And the measurements are done really well. So I'm not having a pop at that. It's to be doing competently. And we detect both cells there. Okay, we see Mr. Brown 21029 and Mr. Purple 16837. How is that normally written up? Okay, so these are the sort of phrases that we routinely see and we have routinely seen. Okay. Oh, it's I'd expect this. It's at or in the vicinity. The phone is right. We're talking about the phone. Yeah, at or in the vicinity of. Most likely at the scene. Most likely at or in the vicinity of the scene. Cell sighting round Stonall. Consistent with being at the scene. That's one a bit more tricksy. We'll talk about that separately. I'm not going to do a straw poll because we're at speed here, but I'm assuming everybody's seen stuff like this, and they've rarely seen anything that isn't like this because that's our experience, right? So if we go and do more work, so we've got our beautiful 800 million measurements, so we can do this quite trivially if we've been there, and we go drive around and we see where the area of overlap is. And what that actually means is, well, we reckon it could have been within 5 kilometers of the scene if using these cells when overlapped. And by the way, this is from a case, I might add. In fact, all bar one of the examples are from cases. The one example that isn't from a case, I'll make absolutely clear why and how. So what we have is, we think that the phone, right? We think this call data would be expected if the phone were within 5 kilometers of the scene. That's a different level of implied precision than at or in the vicinity of, most likely at or in the vicinity of, cell sighting at. Well, we could say it's cell sighting somewhere between Birmingham and Lichfield, and not far from Tamworth, right, and Brownhills. And that's a rather less precise, but it's true, it's accurate. And so the worry, I see, it is consistent with being at the scene. It is. It's also consistent with being 5 kilometres from the scene in any direction. And unless you mention that, it's quite easy for, I think, a juror to have got the wrong impression as to the meaning, the probative value of this evidence. So again, and the point here isn't that the survey was done wrong. If you replace the machine that goes ping for the survey, that doesn't solve this. If you replace the mapping software did what it was supposed to do, right? So this is one. It's not from a case. I've set this up. It's a theoretical exercise. I've set this up deliberately because transposed conditionals are a big deal, and I want you to understand them. It's the prosecutor's fallacy. I know you will at some point have had training on it, but I'd like to emphasise it. I can visualise it very easily in cell site in a way that sometimes is more difficult in other evidence types like DNA. Transposed conditionals, I might add, have been grounds for appeal in evidence types like DNA. They were at the source of some miscarriages of justice in the 70s and 80s, and they are routine, I would suggest, in cell site analysis. So I've set this up. We're in deepest, darkest Wales, or greenest Wales, and we're in a terrain-heavy environment, and we've got a low mass that's designed, it would appear, to serve a specific area. And let me just say, it's an axiom, i.e., it's just true, unquestionably true. It is the truth of the situation that this cell provides service at the scene, right? And also that no other cell provides service at the scene. And the reason for that is they're all distant and there's great big hills in the way, okay? So let's just take that as the truth of the matter. So what's the probability that you would see cell ID 12345 if the device was at the scene? As I say, it definitely provides service at the scene. Well, it's 100%, right? I've set it up so it was like that, right? Right, there's no other cell that could provide service there. So it's either 12345 or nothing. And we know that 12345 was on air at the time of the offence because we've got a call data record on it, right? And we know it serves at the scene, and we know it served at the scene then. Okay. Next question is, what's the probability the device was at the scene if it used 12345? Right. Well, is it the same? Well, it doesn't only serve at the scene. You know, it serves an area. And so in this, it's designed to serve this environment. Well, it's a lot less than 100% then. And that's what a transposed conditional is. You're mistaking the probability of the evidence for the scenario for the probability of the scenario itself. Okay? That's the transposed conditional. That's the prosecutor's fallacy. That's what it looks like in cell site analysis. That's what we were talking about at or in the vicinity of the scene in the previous slide, right? That's a transposed conditional. Well, I detected it serving close to the scene, therefore the phone was close to the scene. Well, no, they're two different things you're assessing. And we're going to go into that in a little bit more detail in a little while. Are the probabilities the same? Well, no. All right. It's kind of obvious. 100% is not the same as a lot less than 100%. Might there be other things? We're talking about the phone here. We shouldn't be talking about the phone, oddly, in cell site analysis. We should be talking about the call data record that is related with the phone. There might be other stuff that's on the phone. We might have WhatsApp messages with photographs of the guy climbing the rocks at the time, or a video of him live streaming to his crowd, his inter-crowd, and he's on Mole Dimmel. And so that would affect your opinion of where the phone was. So the point is that the cell site person shouldn't see that, right? Because that might influence their opinion on the call data record. And also, if you keep it constrained to just the call data record, you're still right if you say, I'd expect this data is in an area that includes the scene. You don't preclude the other data from coming in. And the thing is with the information, that's cognitive bias, that's context bias. So it might affect your pure opinion as to whether you'd expect the call data records. And also, is the guy that understands CDRs, does he know all the limitations of the app or the thing that this other information derived from? And so you're really worried about that. So we've got to be very concerned about that sort of information. If you're in the investigation, however, this is an entirely appropriate way of thinking. All right. So the problem here is that if you're at court, the expert witness at court should only be concerned with whether he would expect the evidence given the proposition. And he should isolate himself from all the other information that's to do with that specific proposition. I hope that makes sense. I'll just put a shout out now. Does anybody not get this point? Because it's important. Is everybody happy? I'll give you 3 seconds. Okay, I'll move on unless somebody shouts in a minute. Right, consistent with, right. This is from a paper, Opinion Evidence in Cell Site Analysis. It got a commendation, the PWLN commendation from the Chartered Society of Forensic Sciences. It was deemed to be one of the most, by the way, the CSFS, it's got a royal charter. It is the premier forensic science society in well, certainly in the UK, I would suggest, if not the, certainly amongst them in the world. And they select a paper or two every year in every field, and they talk about them being the most meritorious. This paper got one of them because it was addressing genuine problems. So again, I say that, A, because I'm smug, and B, because this is viewed as a legitimate position and a genuine problem by a wider forensic science community that's outside of cell site analysis. So whereas I might be a small voice in a big room in cell site, this is not a controversial position that I'm taking within forensic science. So the language here was from a report, and it was from an actual casework report. It's consistent with the phone being at or in the vicinity of the scene in the Aston area of the Birmingham. Only one cell was used. And it didn't talk about directly the home address where they'd had a false negative and not detected service of this cell. So it wasn't apparent that it also served there. But I mean, it's consistent with a lot of things, right? It's consistent with being out in the vicinity of the scene and at the alibi location, which was the home address. It's in the Aston area of Birmingham or in Nechells, Saltley, or down towards Small Heath, or even, look at this over here, 17 kilometres away. I don't know if we've fully mapped this cell. So the point is, what the hell does consistent mean, right? In the area, by the way, it was the most commonly used cell, right? As you'd expect since it served a home address, right? So again, there's all sorts of things where consistent has an apparent level of precision, which is just not useful. It's misleading. And indeed, R.V. Poaka in 2012 gave it guidance. And indeed, consistency is consistent with, is warned against in the Forensic Science Regulator Code and has been since 2016, and is still, we're doing defence work now with established experts who've been doing in this field for 20 years who are using the word consistent, right? Push back on that. Push back on it. I know the barristers like using the word consistent, but the experts shouldn't be, right? Okay, we should be impartial, independent. We should flag the limitations of our opinion. Okay. This is from an actual case. I was actually asked by the prosecution to do some work. And when I was asked to, they said, you'll have a look at the sequence of events, won't you? Because we might ask you about that. And the first thing I saw, like line number 2, was on a question I hadn't addressed. And it said this, that Mr. Green, using the green cell site, and Mr. Blue, using the blue cell site, co-locate at the Piri shop through cell site data. And I immediately, the hairs just went up on the back of my neck, as you can imagine. So what do we mean by that? Well, co-locate means in the same position, right? That's what a jury would understand. And this was in written evidence. And this is the language that we see all the time now at scale. And I'll be honest, the word co-locate to me at this level of scale, it feels post office horizon level scandal to me because it is just inappropriate at every level. It's particularly used in attribution assessments. If you see the word potential co-location, hack at it. Please send it to us so we can have a pop at it because it's inappropriate. So, well, they hadn't looked at the azimuths. Well, one of them's pointed away. By the way, the guy lived here, right? Didn't mention that. So we've got a range of problems with that, right? It's an opinion presented as a fact. We don't know where the phones were. So you reckon you'd expect to see, you expect that they were at the scene? I don't know a technique in cell site that could do that unless the cell only served at the Piri shop. And very few chicken shops have their own cell site. It's just too expensive for EE or whoever to generate that. The smallest cell I've ever seen was, I think it was about 100 meters, and it was an indoor shopping center, right? And I've seen that once in 25 years ish, right? That's not this. It just isn't this. It's a transpose conditional. He's talking about the probability of the scenario rather than the probability of the data given the scenario. That's what I was talking about in the previous slide. That's why it's so important. And also, I don't think one of them was there. So I can't for sure say they weren't co-located, but if they were co-located, they weren't at the Piri shop because one of them didn't serve there and obviously wouldn't, right? So any one of those, I think, is a potential miscarriage of justice if the Piri shop is of prime relevance to the charge and the jury found them guilty and used this as part of their justification to do so. And as I say, I think this is at scale and everybody should be very nervous about it. And the issue is not that the software is wrong. There's even this tool called co-location tool, and it even warns about it within the survey that within the software itself saying this is for investigative use. It's still just trotted out and thrown into evidence, and I think it's appalling. I really do. Now, observations and conclusions, right? We're going to talk about them in a minute. What they've done is they've got an output of a tool and then thought that means something that is actually of probative value in and of itself without further testing. So I'm going to talk about RV Calland here because it nicely segues in. So you could define any forensic science process in 3 large stages. One of them is getting the artifacts, analyzing the artifacts. That's where all the machines that go ping live, and then understanding, assessing what they mean in the context of the positions taken by prosecution and defence. That's for the court level, or using that information investigatively. I'm going to be assuming that we're only talking about court because really I'm a court monkey, and that's where I spend my time. And really that's what the code's about. It's about the stuff that's going in front of the jury. You've got different risks in the investigation. It's basically about going off down the wrong route. You've got risks of miscarriages of justice if it's at court. So the first bit, scenes of crime live in this green here, recognition recording. So the technical complexity. Also, this isn't a hierarchy of values. So it's not like one bit is more important than the other bit. No, these are all important. And if it goes wrong early, it goes wrong for everything that follows. So if you're in traditional forensic science, this is where all the people in the noddy suits and the lights and throwing around alley powder and all the other wonderful things they do, and some of it very specialist. For cell site analysis, it's an administrative legal process. If you've got legal authority to request the records and they still exist, somebody fills out a form, they justify it, it's either approved or it isn't, and then they get them. And the joy of cell site analysis, one of the real strengths, is that we get the data, and it's essentially a virginal scene that we can go back to as many times as we like. We can make as many perfect, pristine copies as we like. We can send them to whoever we want, so long as security constraints are held. And the point is that, a check can have a look at it in a way that somebody that's made an opinion based on a swab from a scene can't, because stuff gets consumed in analysis. So I'm not worried about submission, because that's not my part of the ship, and that's all happened in policing way pre all of this. What we have is machines that go ping. This is where CSAS and Chorus, your mapping software, sit. This is where all the survey kit, and whether we're talking about software-defined radio or engineering handsets or whatever, they all live in there. And then you do calculations from those. You transfer them into more usable formats. You make maps. You make call sequence tables. You say, oh, this mast is this far from this location. That's relevant, and it's pointed toward it. And I detected this cell serving over this sort of area. Those are all observations, right? They are all factual in and of themselves, but they need to have another stage before they become meaningful. We should be assessing what those observations mean in the context of the positions taken by prosecution and, if available, defence. I accept we don't always have a defence case statement. By always, I mean often. Right? My point, though, is that in all of forensic science, all of traditional forensic science, this isn't controversial. You don't have the scenes of crime guy, the guy that got the data, then doing the measurements for the refractive index of the glass, and then saying what it means. Oh yeah, that means the guy broke the window, right? Now, what happened in RV Calland is that's pretty much what happens, and it happens routinely, I might add, in that they took the call data records. They say, I reckon Mr. Calland was the user of this phone. That's what it's alleged. I'm not going to give you my opinion on that. I'm just going to show you a load of maps which show observations of him in the cell sites that were used. And over to you, the jury. I'm not going to tell you what it means, but I did select the data for you. So it obviously means something, right? So here's a bunch of maps. And incidentally, a survey came in and it wasn't particularly helpful because it didn't detect all of the cells. Why? Well, they've got false negatives, right? And that can change with time. And there was no level of interpretation on that either. Over to the jury, it's all fine, right? And so that could all be done by analyst competencies, and it can be done at scale, right? As you can train a lot of people up very quickly to use the software, and you can knock out many maps per hour, many tables per hour. So you can end up with a great big bundle of maps. All the fun of that. And the question really is, if we're just throwing that to the jury, can we reasonably expect them to understand it? And well, in other areas of forensic science, you don't throw the refractive indices of the glass measurements at the jury and then say, well, clearly it means something, right? And this is refractive index of the glass from the scene and from the suspect. But because cell site is so visually useful and you can show a map, you can just throw that there as if it's immediately obvious what it means, common sense, right? That a cell will provide service over a certain distance, right? So normally in other areas of forensic science, you'd go through this route. You'd say, well, did the cells serve the areas, including the observations at the time of the calls that were close to the observations? And if so, is there any data in conflict with that proposition? And in the wider data, none of that was done, right? And so what should have happened is overt cross-examinal opinion, because how do you cross-examine implication? You just can't, right? And so there was so that's what should have happened, really. And so there was a complaint, an objection from the defence that was upheld at the Court of Appeal. And I think one of the standout quotes I've ever heard for cell site analysis is that unhelpfully conflated the location of a particular mast with a question of what safe inferences can be drawn about the telephone using it. Yes. So every time you see a map or a table, that's the concern, right? Has there been a conflation of the location of this thing with what you can say about what the meaning of that is in the context of what's being alleged or the alibi, right? And that is my big point. Although I still want to talk about evaluative opinion. We will get there, I promise. So first of all, your analysts in the investigation, they're doing a different thing. So it's not their fault. Analysts, generally speaking, they're good actors. And by that, I mean they are operating with integrity, not necessarily that they're thespians. They are usually technically competent in a range of fields. They're jacks of trades and potentially masters of none, but that's oftentimes better than a master of one to fulfill that entire quote. And so they're usually at the very beginning, it's the what, where, who, the four bums on a bench, the what, where, who, why, and how being the bench round it. Okay, and so it's pre-charge usually, but then and it's so we can figure out, has an offence been committed, and if so, by whom, and then the details. And it will usually be in an open office, as it were, with all the information shared. It should be. It's a good idea to do that. And so the analyst will see the ANPR, they'll see the content of the messages, they'll see potentially the content of witness statements, and they'll have a view as to which direction the investigation is going, to see which bits that they're looking at align and don't align. And so they produce theories. They're speculative explanations. And I don't mean that pejoratively. I mean that it's what they should be doing. They're generating scenarios and seeing with their scenarios from this piece of information align with the scenarios over here, so that you can end up with your game of Cluedo working out that it was Professor Plum in the billiard room with a snooker cue or whatever. Okay, and that's investigative opinion, right? The expert at court in every field of traditional forensic science doesn't do that, right? Fred's been charged, Stabby Dave has been charged with dead Fred's murder, right? And they're interested in this bit of glass evidence, this bit of footwear evidence, this bit of DNA evidence, whatever it may be. Okay, and so at this point, they're not looking to assist an investigation primarily. They're there to inform the court, which means in crim PR, they're independent, they're impartial. They no fear nor favour. They should be looking at all data, whether or not it's in alignment. Okay, and they should be looking at just their bit that they know about, and they should be able to define the bit that there's their area of expertise. And the guy who's an expert in DNA doesn't talk about glass evidence or probably even blood pattern analysis, even though it's adjacent and it's got these all squidgy, horrible body fluids that most respectable digital forensics don't get involved with. So here we're looking at we're assessing whether we'd expect the information given the positions taken. Right? In DNA, it would be, would I expect this DNA profile if it came from the suspect or from a randomly selected, unrelated individual? So you've got two things, right? You've got the prosecution position and then an alternative position. Because otherwise, how do you express uncertainty? And that's where the case assessment interpretation model shines. It uses something called Bayes theorem. We don't need to go into that, but that's really what it's all about. And so the deal here is that's what evaluative opinion is, right? And if you mistake the two, it's a transposed conditional. And the point here is, that's what an investigator should be doing. They're not bad people. They're doing exactly what they should be. They probably don't want to be at court. They've probably been bullied by the SIO or indeed the prosecuting barrister. I'm not pointing fingers, but they're different requirements and they're non-overlapping. If you're going to do them as a Venn diagram, right? They're different roles. They should be done by different people. And in other areas of forensic science, they are. But in cell site, because it's so damned useful in both roles, and it can be done so quickly and cheaply using automated methods, people are just drifting between them without even understanding that they've gone to where there be dragons. They've gone off the edge of the map here, and they've gone into places they shouldn't have been. Right, I'm looking at the time. It's 18:50. I started a little later. I'm probably going to go for another 15 minutes-ish, and there'll be questions. I'm assuming that's okay?
Yeah, I'm sure that's fine. People can always run away.
Yeah, I won't be offended if there's a mass exodus at 6 o'clock. So, investigative opinion, it's the analyst in the investigation. Evaluative opinion is the expert witness at court. One of them is proposing speculative scenarios. Oh, an equation. Don't worry about that. That's probably to the hypothesis given the evidence. The given, by the way, that's the conditional. The hypothesis given the conditions of the evidence. Testing proposed scenarios is the probability to the evidence given the conditions of the hypothesis. Okay, and conditioning information if we're being really complete. The point is that when you move from one side of the conditional, the given, the line, to the other, that's transposing, right? That's what a transposed conditional is. So you're mistaking that I detected the cell serving within 100 meters of the scene. Therefore, I think the phone was within 100 meters of the scene. This is a statistical way of, or an equation way of stating that. And it's a failure of logic. Okay, and it's explicitly warned against within the code, specifically for cell site analysis, and it's done at scale. So again, look for that. So how do we do it right? So the CAI model was developed 80s, 90s. It was fully developed by the end of the 90s. It was called the Case Assessment Interpretation Model. It was then the Forensic Science Service was shut between 2010 and 2012. And within England and Wales, it was replaced by the private sector. They set up something called the Association of Forensic Science Practitioners, who included people outside of England and Wales as well. And they adopted the CAI model as a requirement for opinion evidence, i.e., this is commercial companies decided to spend the time and toil and treasure to make sure that they didn't get a court without people who were competent in this, and they signed up as this is a requirement, right? It's unknown in digital, pretty much. So the 4 cornerstones: robustness. You've got to have validated your methods. Remember I was talking about the surveys at the very beginning? They were invalidated. If they'd tried to validate it, they'd have found it failed. It was used at scale for years and years and years by competent telecommunication engineers that did not understand that they'd moved into forensic science and didn't understand what a validation was, let alone how to conduct one. Okay, and that's also competency. So is the competency to be able to generate a map the same as the competency to infer inference, to present opinion on an area in which a cell was given? Not by default, it isn't. No, I don't think it is. And then how do you've got to define the competency, and then you've got to test it. And how do you do that? Well, blind trials and written examinations and all of that. Our lot have gone through all that. I would suggest that not many outside of our lot have. Transparency. Right, there's bits of this. One's disclosure. Generally speaking, policing's pretty good at that. There can be problems with CDRs being PDF'd, so you can't use them and all of that. But the real problem is they say potential co-locations and don't say, and the software specifically warns me against using this in a court environment. Right? And this doesn't mean they were co-located at all, and I don't know what it means. Right? I would suggest that expert evidence, it's opinion, which means there's uncertainty in it. If you can't assess or express that uncertainty, you're not a competent expert, right? I think that's one of the tests that should be applied. It's not in the code to say that, but that's my view of it. Balance, right? Your co-location assessment. I've picked out all the bits where the phones were used within a certain distance, used masts within a certain distance and in a certain time frame. And I haven't looked for any points where they're using distant masts to each other in the same time frame. You're picking out one side, the one proposition, the one that's useful to one side of the argument, and you're not bothering with the other, and then you're presenting it means something in isolation. Well, it doesn't. That's the point. That's where Bayes is so important. And then logic, avoiding transposed conditionals. Now we've hammered transposed conditionals, right? But avoiding the prosecution fallacy, not mistaking the probability of the evidence given the hypothesis for the probability of the hypothesis itself. So the AFSP, you can get it here. You'll see this in the thing if you want to go read it. It's a good read, actually. It's only 4 pages. I know that sounds like sarcasm. It's really accessible. I really recommend you have it next to you. Right, the AFSP, Association of Forensic Science Providers, Scottish Police Authority. That's the governmental lab in Scotland. They didn't do the, in my view, lunacy of shutting down the Forensic Science Service. The Irish, IRA, Forensic Science, governmental, Northern Irish, governmental forensic science. So it's not even just within England and Wales. So all the people that aren't doing it primarily via either policing investigative teams themselves or private sector have adopted this. Within England and Wales, which is everybody else, the big players are 3, really: Eurofins, Cellmark and Key. Key have been bailed out a bunch of times, right? They're right close to insolvency most of the time, and they still adhere to this. It's important, right? And I think I challenge any of you to say that these things aren't important. I don't think robustness, transparency, balance, or logic are routinely seen in cell site analysis cases that we review, whether they're from police analysts or indeed from ex-engineers within the industry. Criminal practice directions, right? This is from part 19. Validity of the methods, how safe or unsafe the inference, whether it's being used in the survey, precision, margins of uncertainty. It's the same stuff, right? It's the same stuff as I just said. And by the way, that AFSP standard, those elements are all within the code as well, and they might not be phrased in exactly the same way, but they're requirements within the general code, talking about all of forensic science, and within the cell site bit itself. And for what reason? Because if you don't do this, it's a risk to the criminal justice system. Now, he may not be, Gary, the forensic science regulator, may not be enforcing until next year, but CPD, criminal practice directions, applies right now. That's for a case-by-case basis. And these are things where this is essentially a list of tests that you can do. I would recommend, if you're presented with cell site evidence, to first of all read the white paper that I sent to Tim, because it'll give you the guidance for this. They're supposed to be ready-made, out-the-box arguments for you. And if you're doing defence work, and if you're doing prosecution work also, for you to test whether you think you really want to rely on your evidence. So it's both sides of the coin. This isn't defence-oriented presentation. This is about sound forensic science. But you can argue under CPD right now on a case-by-case basis. Whether or not it's upheld is another matter. I've got no control over that. So the whole point of the code is to design reduce risk to the criminal justice system, right? So what do they want? They want you to define the methods that you're doing and not just drift. We want to define where your competencies lived. That has been in there. It's not going to be enforced until next year, but it was originally in the 2011 original code with no statutory powers. So it's been around for ages. FSRC 135 was the appendix for cell site analysis in 2016. It's been around for ages and people still aren't complying because there was no statutory requirement to. Now, I think that's reckless personally. But my point is that these aren't suddenly dropped on people. These have been out there forever. And there's a body of academic papers that I've been publishing. I've been shouting about this for a long time, as you can probably gather. You need to validate your processes. If you haven't validated them, they're not valid, right? So legitimacy of evidence is the validity of the method and the competent examiner. You should be able to demonstrate that. But if you haven't even bothered trying, well, it's probably not legitimate evidence. Competence, been around for ages. Interpretation, by the way, that overtly talks about balance, logic, robustness, and transparency. But it's not directly brought into the current codes. But I list it because it's been out there for a while. You need to have checks in place, peer review. You saw that in CPD. Legal obligations is more than presentation skills and knowing where to stand and to say your honour, not your majesty when you're in a magistrate's court. That's not what this is. It's about your legal obligations, about impartiality, and not just cherry picking bit. It's about, I would argue, competently giving expert evidence, which means the CAI model, because I don't know of another model that can do it, right? Or at least understanding what the CAI model is, and if you're rejecting, explaining why. Going super fast now because we're just coming up right. One slide summary. So this means it is pretty much the end. This is the point. If you're going to rely on it, and you're the prosecuting barrister, do you believe it to be reliable? Because I can tell you straight, a lot of the stuff the police analysts do will make your job gaining a prosecution probably easier than if it came to me, for example. Whether or not it's a safe conviction is an entirely different question, right? And there's a worry here. As I say, I've been watching the Post Office Horizon inquiry with great interest because there's a whole load of stuff that was established practice for a long time that has not ended well. And as I say, the issues that I flag here, they're not sour grapes. They're genuine and profound issues that are recognised within forensic science and indeed within the code. And from what I can see, some police forces are doubling down in just not complying. And in my view, the best thing that could be done is they should be challenged, frankly. So here's the last slide, just my friendly advice. First of all, insist on an expert report. And that means opinion. That means somebody saying, I'm an expert. I can explain why I'm an expert. And I'm going to say what I think about this information in the context of the positions taken by prosecution and defence, and I've complied with my obligations. All right, maps and tables are not that. If somebody sends you 200 maps and tables and say, what do you say about that then? The problem won't be that the maps and tables are incorrect. The problem will be the implications probably that are given of concerning them or the inferences from them, in which case you need to know what those are overtly so that they can be tested in advance of the trial, right? Because if you haven't got them, then often there'll be opinions just given on the fly in the witness box, and you've got no chance of auditing that. And how can you appropriately cross-examine them? I think it's an awful way of working. So when you have it, whether or not the code is going to be complied with, is going to be, is going to be enforced by specifically the regulator. It's an irrelevance, right? These are things that are identified as risks to the criminal justice system. Are you taking risks to the criminal justice system? It's a valid question on a case-by-case basis. And so use CPD and CrimPR as the basis of that question. Again, the white paper that we send out, the legal obligations paper, I would suggest, should help you with that because it includes all of the references. So you can just go and grab them yourself. And you can also, you don't have to take my word for it. Go read it. See if you agree. Oh, and yeah, by the way, co-locate. If you see that, just immediately just get upset and start shouting, I do. Consistent, just don't. Just don't. These are things that are known to cause problems, and we can look at that if you're not happy to. But I would hope, some of the time you'll be able to just make an argument straight from the white paper, as it were. Right, I've spoken really quickly for about 55 minutes. I think it's a triumph for me to do it inside an hour, if I'm honest. I'm going to stop there, unless people really want me to continue, because I've got another 3 hours on here. But I'd like to stop for questions anyway, no matter what. So if I just stop sharing for a moment.
Thanks very much, Matt. I hope that was fascinating as I found it. Anyone got any questions either about Matt's presentation, the codes, the calend, which I think was Holroyd, that quotation you liked so much.
It was lovely, just lovely.
Yeah, he is class. Robert? You're muted, Rob.
Can you hear me, Matt?
I can.
Yeah, I prosecute almost entirely. Should I simply tell the police they cannot rely on analysts to deliver this kind of evidence?
Other views are available. I think it's plain what I think. I think it's unsound. I think
no, I'm grateful for that, because trying to get them to actually do any other work apart from that is next to impossible.
Right. So one of the reasons why I'm so enthused to talk to you good people, apart from the fact I like talking, is that we've been trying to persuade the CPS to act as a blocker for this, to say, look, this under Callan, this is a problem. Under the codes, this is a problem. That hasn't happened. And I have been instructed, because a barrister has read on specific cases and said, I've got no objection to the maps and tables that have been presented to me by a police analyst. But in my view, I'm concerned to do with RV Calland, and we're relying on this evidence. Let's be clear, it doesn't matter if nobody's contesting where the phone was, right? If people are potentially either definitely or potentially contesting, I can't see how you can safely use analyst product for the reasons that I've just given over the last hour. So I would argue, I would recommend you do, but I'm not a barrister, right? I'm an expert witness, but I think it's just fundamentally unsound. I think the evidence by implication, opinion evidence presented as fact or via implication, I don't think that's good for anybody, right? I can't see how there's going to be a problem at some point, and then there's going to be a sudden, well, how long has this been happening for? And then it's a can of worms with many automated canning factories, worm canning factories, actively contributing to them. I would recommend you push back on it. Absolutely. There's no grey area with me, actually, but I can't tell you what to do. Okay. Charlie.
Sorry, Matt, in a nutshell, I came to the seminar late, but in a nutshell, why is co-location just such a dangerous proposition?
Right. I've recorded the whole presentation. It will be in the link at the end, so Brilliant. You can go back and see that. But in a nutshell, there's two real reasons with it. One of them is a matter of balance. If you're picking out all of the bits that help your argument, but don't look for anything that's in conflict with that proposition. So if we're talking about, for example, an attributed phone or an attributed phone and an alleged phone, and you say there are a number of times where I think that they are where the software has detected they're using cell sites within a certain distance, within a certain time frame. Well, there's a bunch of problems with that. Just because they are a kilometre apart within 10 seconds doesn't mean the cells overlap. You might actually be in conflict. Secondly, well, what does the number mean? Right? I mean, if we've got a drugs phone in at the moment, and it's got like 100 text messages that goes out as a round robin, and we've actually got 100 co-locations with actually 3 minutes. The alleged phone and the attributed phone within 2 kilometres of each other. It doesn't mean anything. But the main problem for me, I think, well, there's the balance part. If you're not looking for data in conflict, then it's not an impartial assessment. You've cherry-picked the bits you say. Co-location means together. If you're talking about potential co-location, that's a transpose conditional. You're talking about the probability of the scenario itself. That's a problem automatically, just in the way you're phrasing it. And it has resulted in, or It is grounds. It has been used as grounds for appeal in DNA where a transposed conditional has happened. I'll go into some detail for that for about 20 minutes from about 15 minutes into the talk.
Brilliant. Thanks so much.
Yeah,
In fact,
we'll have the recording, Charlie.
I'll go further than that. When we do attribution assessments, our leading position on it is we're trying to disprove the phones were together. Because you can never prove a theory, right, from a scientific perspective. And that's the difference between approaching cell site analysis as a forensic science activity and as a policing activity. Because if you're in the investigative mode, it's really useful to do a co-location analysis. If you're trying to look for data in conflict, it doesn't help you at all. But it appears to mean something. So the problem is it's so misleading.
Any more for any more? Silence came the grim reply. You'll understand it. Wonderful.
By the way,
yeah.
I'm happy for you to reach out directly to me, right, Tim? I will go on for. I bet you get bored before I do. So just if there are any questions after the event, I wish I'd asked that. Just call. We'll set up a Teams. We'll have a chat. Okay.
Very grateful, Matt. As I say, if you can get the recording to me, and anyone who wants the recording or the white paper or any detail, just let me know, and we'll go from there. So I hope everyone found that as useful as I did. Correct some of our misapprehensions and our mistakes, but we can go forward doing it differently. So good luck. And Matt, thank you very much. We will no doubt be in touch.
My
certainly
pleasure.
got a case I want you to come and check. I think I saw Mark Dakin on there. Mark, we've got our expert. So yeah, brilliant. Thank you very much.
Cheers,
Thank you for the time. Thank you. Bye-bye.